Usually when you open a history textbook to study for a massive exam, there's this expectation of, I don't know, stillness.
Stillness, right, like a museum.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're walking through this dusty, quiet museum where every event is just locked in its own little glass display case.
Right. You look at the American Revolution in one room, and then you walk down the hall to see the French Revolution,
Right.
and then you take the stairs to look at 19th century Spain. It feels very contained, safe even.
But then you step into the actual history of the Age of Revolutions or, the Era de las Revoluciones, and suddenly that whole museum just shatters.
Oh, completely. It's not neat at all.
No, we're not looking at isolated display cases. We're looking at a giant, chaotic detectives crime board.
Yeah.
The ones covered in pushpins and red string.
At the conspiracy boards.
Yeah, exactly. Where a war debt in London directly causes a riot in Paris, which accidentally triggers an independence movement in Argentina.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And then that somehow leads to a statue that you literally walked past in Madrid's Retiro Park last week.
The interconnectedness is just staggering. And for you, the student listening to this right now, gearing up for your massive historical unit, that interconnectedness isn't just like an interesting trivia fact.
No, it's everything.
Right. It is your absolute secret weapon for this exam.
Welcome to this deep dive. Your mission today is not just to regurgitate dates onto a piece of paper.
Please don't do that.
Right. We are taking your specific sources. So the class notes you took from Liz's presentation, the Unit 7 PowerPoint, the textbook sections, and yes, even that class excursion to Retaro Park.
Such a great field trip.
It really is. And we are building you a comprehensive roadmap. We're going to decode what you need to study, how to strategically study it, and how the dramatic events of Europe, Spain, and the Americas are fundamentally woven together. Okay, let's unpack this.
So before we even touch the historical narrative, we really have to talk about the rules of the game.
The methodology.
Exactly. To win this exam, you have to understand the specific methodology your teacher expects. First, look at the evaluation items at the very beginning of your class PowerPoint.
That's basically the cheat sheet.
It is. It tells you exactly what your teacher values most. But the second rule, this is where I see people really crash and burn.
Oh, the key concept timing.
Yes, key concept timing. Your study guide is incredibly strict about avoiding anachronisms. Like, you can't use the term liberalism before the 1820s.
Right, and you definitely cannot talk about socialist or anarchist ideas as, like, fully formed movements until the second half of the 19th century.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is why this rule exists. It's not just pedantic gatekeeping by historians.
Although they love to do that.
Well, sure, but in this case, terminology is a direct reflection of the actual material conditions of a specific time.
Meaning what? Exactly.
Meaning, ideologies like socialism literally could not exist during the French Revolution because the industrial factory conditions that sparked those ideas hadn't happened yet.
Ah, right. The vocabulary has to match the reality on the ground. It's like bringing a smartphone to a sword fight.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, if you drop the word anarchism while writing an essay about the 1700s, you are immediately failing the historical vibe check. You're showing you don't understand the physical world those people were living in.
Which leads directly into rule number 3, which is evaluating events through the lens of who benefited.
Okay, this is a big one.
It is. Your teacher wants you to classify historical events as progressive, conservative, or reactionary. Ask yourself, did this event push society forward toward new rights?
Right. Progressive.
Exactly. Or did it try to maintain the status quo, conservative? Or did it violently pull society backward to an older, usually monarchical system?
Reactionary. Okay, so keep those 3 lenses, progressive, conservative, reactionary, in your pocket, because we're going to use them right now to decode our first major topic, the financial domino effect.
Let's follow the red string on that crime board.
Yes. Starting with the American Revolution.
Yeah.
If we look at the notes from Liz's presentation, this wasn't just, a squabble over tea tax.
Oh, not at all.
The revolutionaries were deeply guided by Enlightenment ideas. They argue that liberty was a fundamental right, not a favor granted by a king.
But ideas alone don't start wars. The material spark, according to the sources, was money.
It's always money.
Always. The UK was basically drowning in debt after fighting the 7 Years' War with France. So to pay off that massive deficit, they decided to squeeze their American colonies with new taxes.
Right.
And that economic pressure is what actually ignited the revolution.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. like the brutal irony of the financial dominoes. So the UK goes broke fighting France,
Hmm.
which causes the American colonies to rebel.
Right.
Then France decides to help the United States win that independence just to stick it to the British. But doing so sends France so massively into debt that it directly causes the French Revolution.
It's a perfect, catastrophic chain reaction. If you review your textbook, the French financial crisis was so severe that the king was forced to convene the Estates General.
Which was basically an assembly of the different social classes, right?
Right, to figure out how to raise taxes.
Yeah.
And the establishment's brilliant plan: make the third estate, the commoners, the peasants, the people who are already starving, bear the entire financial burden.
Spoiler alert, the people did not take kindly to that plan.
No, they did not.
The Third Estate broke off, formed their own National Assembly in Paris, and the masses backed them up by storming the Bastille prison.
And if we use our analytical toolkit here,
Right, the progressive lens. The storming of the Bastille was a massive progressive victory. It physically proved the king had lost his absolute power.
from there, the revolution swings like a violent pendulum. You get the drafting of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is a very progressive document.
But then the paranoia kicks in.
Exactly. The instability causes a swing into the radical, bloody phase of the Reign of Terror under Robespierre. Then it swings back into a moderate, corrupt phase known as the Directory.
And all that chaos simply exhausted the French people.
Yeah.
Paving the way for a singular authoritarian figure to step in and promise order.
Enter Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right. He completely ends the French Revolution with a coup d'etat.
Hmm.
And looking through our lenses, his regime was fundamentally conservative and, in many ways, completely reactionary.
Yeah, your study guide uses Napoleon as the ultimate case study for a very specific political lesson. When a leader claims to be neither left nor right, it almost always results in right-wing dictatorial politics.
Wait, really? Does the study guide give an example?
Yes, your notes explicitly point to Haiti. So during the Haitian Revolution, the enslaved people fought for and won their freedom, abolishing slavery.
Okay.
But when Napoleon took power, he sent troops to Haiti to violently reinstate slavery.
Oh, wow. That is exactly why we have to look beyond what historical figures say in their grand speeches and analyze what their policies actually do to vulnerable social classes.
Absolutely. Actions over words. But Napoleon's empire eventually overreaches. He tears up the old maps of Europe until he's finally defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815.
Okay, so with Napoleon permanently out of the picture, the conservative royalist victors of Europe look at the mess he made and basically decide they want to put the revolutionary genie back in the bottle.
They want the old regime back.
Right, which brings us to the massive diplomatic summit known as the Congress of Vienna. And I know the study guide explicitly says to check the textbook map for this, so you really need to visualize the borders changing.
You really do. The visual is key here.
But I have to push back on the architects of this Congress. Weren't they basically just drawing lines on a map blindly to punish France? It seems incredibly short-sighted to just mash territories together without thinking about the people actually living there.
Well, it wasn't blind at all. It was actually a highly calculated geopolitical chess game, entirely masterminded by England.
Really? How so?
England's goal was brilliant. They wanted to ensure the European continent remained perfectly balanced and internally divided. Because if everyone in Europe is watching each other, no single country can threaten England.
Leaving the British free to focus entirely on dominating global overseas trade.
Exactly. So, to keep France in check, the Congress established strong buffer states around France's borders.
But surely that had unintended consequences. You can't just invent new borders and expect everyone to be happy.
That is the crucial point. The unintended consequences shaped the rest of the century. So, to create a strong buffer against France, the Congress gave a chunk of territory called the Rhineland, specifically the Ruhr region, to Prussia.
Okay.
What they completely failed to realize was that handing Prussia the Rhineland was handing them the exact industrial ingredients they would need to dominate the continent later.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the Rhineland was sitting on massive reserves of coal and iron.
Oh my gosh. They accidentally gave Prussia the cheat codes for the Industrial Revolution.
Pretty much. And because of these new borders, these buffer states end up becoming the engines of a brand new powerful force, which is nationalism.
Let's trace that force. Look at Italy. The Congress of Vienna strengthened the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia as a buffer in the south, right?
Yeah.
And using that consolidated power, Piedmont-Sardinia eventually leads the charge to unify all of Italy, annexing the two Sicilies in 1866, and finally conquering Rome in 1870.
And then there's Prussia, Armed with all that Rhineland coal and iron, Prussia transforms into an absolute powerhouse of industry and railways.
Which they used to build an unstoppable military.
Yes, they use this superior technology, wealth, and military strategy to literally forge the German Empire out of smaller states. They systematically defeat Denmark, then Austria, and finally they crush France under Napoleon III in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871.
Okay, but the syllabus requires you to make a very careful distinction here. The idea of nationalism driving these unifications wasn't a monolith. There were two distinct models.
Right. First, you have the progressive or French model of nationalism. This is based on shared civic values and rights. It's an imagined community based on a social contract.
So, under the progressive model, anyone can theoretically join that nation if they agree to the civic rules and values,
Yeah.
like what the United States claimed to base its identity on.
Precisely. But the conservative or German model of nationalism is entirely different. It's based on shared language, bloodlines, and historical customs.
So it's inherently exclusive.
Highly exclusive. You are either born into the nation or you aren't. And this conservative model is what primarily drove the unifications of both Italy and Germany.
Okay, so borders are shifting, Prussia is industrializing, and the economic realities on the ground are completely transforming. All those new factories require workers.
And those workers are about to realize that the old promises of liberty didn't really apply to the factory floor.
This is where liberalism undergoes a profound crisis. Throughout 1820 and 1830, liberalism was the driving force behind revolutionary waves allied with the working classes against monarchs.
Right.
But by 1848, liberalism consolidates its power in Central and Western Europe. It breaks into progressive and conservative factions, and crucially, it completely severs its ties with socialism.
Which is a massive turning point.
So what does this all mean? Let me give you an analogy. Imagine liberalism and the labor movement are two people trying to push a heavy car up a steep hill to overthrow a king.
Yeah.
It takes all their combined strength.
Okay, I can picture that.
But once they get to the top, liberalism jumps into the driver's seat, locks the doors, and speeds off down the highway.
Wow.
Yeah, they consolidate power, put on a suit, and completely abandon the labor movement in the grimy, dangerous new factories of the Industrial Revolution.
Leaving the workers to form their own radical underground movements?
Exactly.
That perfectly illustrates the dynamic. Both factions of liberalism essentially abandoned their original revolutionary goals of creating a truly just society free from poverty. The working class, the proletarians, are left completely disenfranchised.
Creating a massive pressure cooker.
Oh, a huge one. A pressure cooker of popular disenchantment that would eventually explode much later during World War I.
Which brings us to the ideologies detailed in your Unit 7 PowerPoint. The labor movement desperately needed a new framework. It initially divided into utopian socialism and scientific socialism.
The latter of which we know as Marxism, shaped by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
Right.
Your teacher specifically wants you to understand key Marxist concepts here. You need to be able to define the means of production, meaning the factories, the land, and the raw resources used to create wealth.
Got it.
And you absolutely must understand historical materialism.
Wait, let me stop you there. Historical materialism basically argues that history isn't driven by great ideas or brilliant leaders, right? It's driven purely by economics.
Exactly. Marxists view history as a relentless evolution of production modes driven by class conflict.
So moving from slave-owning societies to feudalism to capitalism.
Right. And they argued it would eventually inevitably evolve into socialist and communist societies. According to this view, the ideas and laws of a society are just a reflection of whoever controls the wealth.
The Unit 7 PowerPoint also emphasizes alienation.
Yes, that's a key term.
Think of it this way. A traditional Spanish shoemaker feels pride in crafting and selling a finished pair of leather boots. But an industrial factory worker, they might pull a single metal lever 1,000 times a day to stamp out a piece of rubber.
They never see the final product.
Exactly. They never own what they make. They're entirely alienated from their own labor. And when those workers look around and realize every other lever puller is being exploited exactly like they are, that is the spark of class consciousness.
But just like liberalism, the labor movement fractures internally. During the First International, a permanent schism erupts between the Marxists and the anarchists, led by figures like Mikhail Bakunin.
How do they differ?
Well, the Marxists wanted to seize the power of the state to transition to communism, while the anarchists wanted to abolish the state entirely and immediately.
Big difference.
Huge. And later, during World War I, the Marxists split again into reformist nationalist factions who support their individual countries in the war, and internationalist revolutionary factions who violently oppose the war.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Um, the ideological splintering of the labor movement is happening at the exact same time and mirroring the physical and political splintering of Europe leading up to World War I. Everyone is drawing deep lines in the sand.
We have covered a lot of European ground, but we need to bring this deep dive home to your specific syllabus, because while Europe was industrializing and philosophizing, the Iberian Peninsula was going on an absolute political roller coaster.
It's like a giant political pendulum swinging wildly back and forth. Spain's 19th century kicks off with the crisis of the old regime under Carlos IV.
Right.
This leads to the Mutiny of Aranjuez, and eventually the country is practically handed over to Napoleon.
Which sparks the Peninsular War from 1808 to 1814. The clannish people are fighting a brutal guerrilla war against the French invasion.
But internally, Spanish liberals use the chaos of the war to their advantage, right?
Exactly. While the king is gone, they draft Spain's very first constitution, the Constitution of Cadiz, in 1812.
A massive progressive milestone, which, let me guess, gets immediately crushed when the war ends.
Precisely. When Fernando VII reclaims the throne, he aggressively yanks the pendulum backward, returning Spain to strict absolutism. He holds absolute power for almost his entire reign, with one brief, shining exception.
The Trienio Liberal.
Yes, a 3-year liberal period initiated by an uprising led by General Riego.
But wait, earlier we talked about the conservative European powers from the Congress of Vienna. Didn't they pledge to stop liberal revolutions?
They did, and they honored that pledge. An alliance of absolutist countries sends a massive French army, poetically named the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis, to march straight into Spain and crush the Trienio Liberal.
So the reactionary forces win again, violently maintaining the status quo.
Right. And when Fernando VII finally dies, the pendulum swings so hard it breaks. He leaves behind a succession crisis that triggers the Carlist Wars.
Spain becomes violently polarized.
Very much so. On one side, you have the liberals tentatively supporting his daughter, Isabel II. On the other side, you have absolute reactionaries and disenchanted conservatives, the Carlists supporting his brother, Carlos.
Isabel II technically wins, maintaining a highly conservative liberal government. But the instability never stops. She's eventually expelled from the throne in 1868.
Kicking off the Sexenio Democratico.
Yes, a wild 6-year revolutionary period where Spain is frantically searching for a new monarch. This is where the red string on our crime board crosses borders again.
I love this part.
Right. Spain briefly chooses an Italian king, Amadeo of Savoy. But during this search, Prussia actually tried to place a German king on the Spanish throne.
Which terrified France.
Yeah. France was so terrified of being geographically surrounded by Germans in Prussia and a German in Spain that this diplomatic crisis directly contributed to the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. Spain, looking for a king, accidentally helped trigger a massive European war. That blows my mind.
The interconnectedness is undeniable, so Amadeo eventually abdicates, leading to the short-lived First Republic, which collapses and ends with a military coup by General Martinez Campos.
Okay, listener, this is the coolest part of your study guide. You literally walk past this history. The Martinez Campos coup brings back the Bourbon dynasty under Alfonso XII. Both Martinez Campos and Alfonso XII have massive statues right there in Retiro Park.
The ones you looked at during your class excursion by the lake.
Exactly. The history isn't abstract. It's sitting right there in your city.
Now, while Spain is tearing itself apart internally, we have to look at the American echo. What is happening in Spain's vast colonies?
Well, just like the American Revolution in the North was sparked by economic pressure, so was Hispanic American independence. Socially, the colonies were dominated locally by the Criollos.
The descendants of Europeans who were white, wealthy, and owned the businesses.
Right, but they were deeply resentful because the top government jobs and ultimate political power were reserved exclusively for the peninsulares.
The officials actually born back in Spain.
Exactly. So the Criollos had read the Enlightenment text and they watched the success of the United States Revolution. But they needed a mechanism, an opening to act.
Once again, the catalyst is Napoleon.
Always Napoleon.
Always. When Napoleon invades Spain and forces the Spanish king to abdicate, it creates a massive, sudden power vacuum in the colonies across the Atlantic.
The Criollos look at Spain, see the French in charge, and basically say, we don't answer to a French king. They use that vacuum to form self-governing juntas.
And over time, those juntas evolve into fighting for full independent republics, driven by legendary military leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín.
Culminating in decisive victories like the Battle of Ayacucho.
This relentless century of loss for the Spanish Empire officially concludes with the disaster of '98. Spain loses its very last major colonial holdings, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines.
And according to your guide, this happened for two main reasons. First, Spain's sheer inability to manage those territories effectively after a century of internal civil wars.
Understandable given what they just went through.
Right. And second, the highly self-interested, aggressive military intervention of the United States.
This raises an important question, and it brings our entire deep dive full circle.
Remember your mission for this exam. You are not memorizing a random list of disconnected dates. You are tracing a web of cause and effect. A massive warjet in London pushes the U.S. colonies to rebel.
That drains France's treasury, causing the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon.
Napoleon invades Spain, which gives South America the sudden opening to rebel.
Napoleon's defeat leads to the Congress of Vienna, which accidentally hands Prussia the coal it needs to unite Germany.
Germany's meddling in Spain's chaotic politics sparks a new war.
And the conservative backlash to all of this creates the underground labor movements that will dictate the entire 20th century.
It is all connected. To succeed, you just need to lean on the sources we discussed. Use Liz's presentation to remember the economic spark of the U.S. Revolution.
Use the Unit 7 PowerPoint to vividly remember the alienation of the factory worker.
And use your class timeline to navigate Spain's chaotic pendulum swings.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over regarding that very last event on your syllabus, the disaster of '98.
The final pushpin at the end of the red string.
Precisely. Consider the irony. The United States begins this historical unit in the 1770s by fighting a massive European empire, demanding liberty as a fundamental universal right. That was their progressive justification for existing.
Right.
But the unit ends in 1898 with that exact same United States intervening in Spain's last colonies, taking control of territories like Puerto Rico and the Philippines for their own strategic gain, and effectively acting as an empire themselves.
Wow. From fighting an empire to becoming one?
Yeah. So as you sit down to take this exam, ask yourself, how does a nation's definition of the word liberty change when it transitions from being the scrappy underdog fighting for survival to becoming a dominant global superpower?
The museum display cases are permanently shattered. Good luck on your exam. You've got this.